Have you ever wanted the ability to heal yourself, immortality, or maybe the secrets to God and life itself? Well, have I got news for you. Just read this 800-year-old alchemical manuscript called Magnalia Dei, or a treatise of the Philosopher's Stone. It provides you with complete knowledge of how to make the Philosopher's Stone, which will give you all of the abilities and information that I have mentioned above. Or so they thought it would in the 13th century. All joking aside, Magnalia Dei, or a treatise of the Philosopher's Stone, is a real alchemical manuscript and currently resides in the University of Iowa Special Collections. It ostensibly provides the alchemical instructions that are necessary to create the Philosopher's Stone. And as a side note, I will be referring to the manuscript as Magnalia Dei, or just the manuscript, throughout the rest of the video. Because if I use the full title, Magnalia Dei, or Treatise of the Philosopher's Stone, every time I mentioned it, we'd be here all day. To get back on track, I was lucky enough to be able to get a hands-on look at Magnalia Dei at the University of Iowa Special Collections. After examining it and reading through its contents, I believe that this is a fascinating physical artifact with an even more fascinating story surrounding it. Although, the book is primarily fascinating due to the oddities found within its historical context and the fact that it contains blatant misinformation. Unfortunately, the oddities in Magnalia Dei exemplify how misfortune and ambiguity can quickly degrade the validity and usefulness of a text. Furthermore, it highlights the importance of thorough research into such sources. This is especially disappointing because I was really hoping to cook up my own Philosopher's Stone by the time I finished reading it. Before we get into the unique aspects of Magnalia Dei, I want to give you a sense of what the manuscript is like. The manuscript was encased in cardboard and had separate sections for the boards and the manuscript itself. The boards were a deep brown color and quite thin, with signs of decay around the edges. The manuscript was written on 12 yellow leaves that were almost completely intact, with minimal tearing along the edges. The ink that it was written in was a dark brown color and written in an attractive cursive style. Overall, I was in awe at how well preserved the manuscript was, despite it being over 370 years old. However, the real fun began once I started to look inside the manuscript. One thing that you should know is that this manuscript is a copy of an original manuscript, which is attributed in the text to a man named Raymond Lull, who is said to have written the original manuscript sometime in the latter half of the 13th century. What's odd is that the transcriber never explicitly states their name. Instead, they simply state their initials, R.S. This raises the question, who is R.S.? Well, I decided to start the search for the mystery man by looking at the notes of the original seller and the University of Iowa item description. Well, it turns out that they are just as clueless as I am and have no idea. Given that the manuscript was transcribed in 1650, this person was most likely born sometime before 1630 and must have died sometime after 1650. After doing some further investigation, I can confidently say that there's no definitive conclusion for who this person might be, and we thus have no idea how credible the transcriber is. Although, I did find a few names that could use further investigation, one of which is Robert Sanderson, who was born in 1587 and died in 1663. Who may have been connected to the book due to his theological and philosophical training, which are pertinent topics relating to the Philosopher's Stone. Another name that piqued my interest was Robert Stapleton, who was born in 1607 and died in 1669. He was an English writer and translator. This grabbed my attention because the original transcript was most likely written in some sort of Middle English, which would have required some translation. Although we are not sure of who the transcriber was, we do have a better idea of who the original author was. The author is generally attributed to be a man by the name of Raymond Lull, a polymath who was a philosopher, theologian, poet, missionary, and Christian apologist from the kingdom of Majorca. He was quite the Renaissance man. We have this knowledge because R.S. wrote that Lull was the original author on the first page of the manuscript. However, we can't be exactly sure about this either, because the original seller did some research and found that there are absolutely no original copies or references to the original copy in any collection of Lull's work or in any relevant alchemical archives. Due to this fact, it is generally thought that the original copy was destroyed at some point. Either that, or there might be a possibility that R.S. could have been the original author and attributed authorship to Lowell for unknown reasons, which essentially means that R.S. could have just made this all up. The final odd piece of information that I found is that the manuscript was originally dedicated to King Edward IV. You might be asking yourself, what's so odd about that? Well, the thing is that Raymond Lull lived between 1232 and 1315. And King Edward IV wasn't born until over 100 years after Lull's death in 1312, making the notion that he dedicated this to King Edward IV chronologically extremely unlikely. It is thought that this was a mistake in the text, and the original seller thought that it actually meant to say King Edward III. Well, guess what? This also doesn't make much sense because King Edward III wasn't born until 3 years before Lull died. This suggests that Lull dedicated Magnalia Dei to a future king. However, if he were to have dedicated it to the future King Edward III, he would have had to either A. written the book before Edward III was even born and have known that he would be named Edward, B. written it 3 years before his death and dedicated it to Edward III before he was even the king, or C. actually have meant to dedicate it to King Edward II, who was actually a king during Lull's lifetime. Wow, that's a lot of errors and a lot to digest. In conclusion, Magnalia Dei, or Treatise of the Philosopher's Stone, is a fascinating artifact that reveals the importance of having credible sources, known original texts, and ensuring that historical information is accurate. While the manuscript contains errors and ambiguity regarding its contents and history, exploring the manuscript has been a rewarding experience, and it highlights the importance of thorough research and scrutiny when examining historical texts. Although it is sad to say my search for the Philosopher's Stone must continue elsewhere, my journey with Magnalia Dei has been a fascinating one. Thank you.